principles, a rejection of foreign intervention, and a strict adherence to the constitutional rule of law. This will be difficult to achieve, but it's not impossible and well worth the effort. And Mr. Speaker, I now would like to defer to one of our colleagues who has arrived on the floor and is going to participate in this special order, and that's the gentleman from North Carolina. And I alluded to the fact that looking for the truth was very important, and there's nobody in the Congress that surpasses this gentleman's effort to pursue the truth and his willingness to take personal responsibility for what he has said and voted for in the past. And this to me is so important because his pursuit of truth, I think, is key. And the efforts he's made here in the last couple of years, I think, is just critical. Because he's been concerned specifically about information that we in the Congress were given in order to make our decision to deliver this authority to the President. And it is this pursuit of truth that I think is so critical, and I have such high regards for the gentleman for doing this. And at this time, I would like to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones.
Speaker, I want to thank you and the gentleman from Texas, and I'd like to say about the gentleman from Texas that he has been on the floor so many times talking about the economic future of this country and also talking about unjust wars. And I would like to, tonight, in the few minutes I have, I would like to quote from Rudyard Kipling. It's called The Epitaphs of the War, 1914 to 1918. Mr. Kipling at one time was a proponent of aggressive actions, but once his son was killed, he seemed to change his thought, which is understandable. And I quote very quickly before I make my brief comments. If any question why we died, tell them because our fathers lied. I will leave it at that, Mr. Speaker. I think that speaks for itself, and that again was Rudyard Kipling, not me, Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina. Along with my friend from Texas, I can tell you that I seek the truth. I came to this floor 3.5 years ago. I cast my vote to give the President the authority to commit troops to Iraq. I came to this floor. I was not sure that I was doing the right thing, but I hoped and prayed that I was. But since that time, because I do seek the truth, as my friend from Texas said, that I want to mention to you tonight just a few facts that I have uncovered. Let me base some of this comment tonight on people I've met with in my office, person to person, such as Carl Ford, former CIA, Paul Pillar, former CIA for 31 years, Larry Wilkerson, Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, General Anthony Zinni, CENTCOM Commander for 3 years, General Gregory Newbold, General John Batiste, former Colonel Karen Kotowski, Ray McGovern, CIA, and former Colonel Sam Gardner, Jim Bamford, author of Pretext for War, and John Landau and Warren Strobel, writers for Knight Ridder. Tonight I want to start my brief comments with an article written by Gregory Newbold. General Newbold is a Marine general. He was part of J3 at the Department of Defense prior to our going into war in Iraq. General Newbold is a very impressive man. He was a 2-star Marine general on the way to being a star. But I would like, with unanimous consent, to submit the whole article. It's a 3-page in Time magazine, written by General Newbold, not by a writer. And I would like to ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. This is what he said in this article. I was a witness and therefore a party to the actions that led to the invasion of Iraq, a necessary war. Inside the military family, I made no secret of my view that the zealots' rationale for war made no sense, and I think I was outspoken enough to make those senior to me uncomfortable. But I now regret that I did not do more openly challenge those who were determined to invade a country whose actions were peripheral to the real threat, Al-Qaeda. I retired from the military 4 months before the invasion, in part because of my opposition to those who had used 9/11's tragedy to hijack our security policy. Until now, I have resisted speaking out in public. I've been silent long enough. Mr. Speaker, I could quote more from General Newbold's article, but the record would show this, and I do not need to read more. It is so sad to me that so many in our military and also our CIA saw what was happening in those who wanted to go to war in Iraq, but truthfully did not have the credibility or could prove what they were saying was a fact. This today, as a matter of fact, my good friend and Mr. Paul's good friend from Missouri, Ike Skelton, is on the floor. I assume he'll speak when we finish. We held hearings today on the Armed Services Committee. He is the ranking member. This was to, if you will, to rally about the fact that we found 500 weapons known as munitions that Senator Santorum and Representative Hoekstra was saying, oh, this shows us that there was weapons of mass destruction, and it just was not true. I don't mean to discredit them, but it was not true. These weapons, according to the experts, were probably in existence from 1984 to 1991. And as a matter of fact, today at our hearing we had former UN Inspector David Kay, Dr. David Kay, and I quoted this during the hearing today. Mr. Kay has said, which this announcement was made 2 weeks ago, and nobody at the administration was excited about it and said, oh, this is the secret, this is what happened, this is why we went to war. None of that was said, and certainly I've not heard a peep, if you will, from Secretary Rumsfeld, but Dr. Kay said, well, I questioned this as far as being the weapons of mass destruction, and this is what he said, and I brought this out today, later on this afternoon, and I'll quote this. He said, they probably would have been intended for chemical attacks during the Iraq War, said Dr. Kay, who headed the U.S. weapons hunting team in Iraq from 2003 until 2004. He said experts on Iraq's chemical weapons are in almost 100% agreement that sarin nerve agents produced from the 1980s would no longer be dangerous. And I quote Dr. David Kay, and I asked him about this today, and he said, yes, sir, this is what I said. And I quote, it is less toxic than most things that Americans have under their kitchen sink at this point. That is what he said. And yet we've got those in the Congress who are just beating the drums of this is what we were saying, it's the reason we went to war. We should never, under any circumstances, send American boys to die for this country unless we know the intelligence has been verified. And I regret, and I said this Monday, I was invited by Senator Dorgan to sit on the Democratic Policy Committee's investigation of the Iraq War, where they had 3 or 4 CIA agents there to testify, and the senator very kindly allowed me to sit at the dais. And I apologize that I did not ask the questions before we went into Iraq. I now know better, but I didn't at the time. I'm not smarter, Mr. Speaker, but I'm wiser, much wiser. But I said today as Frank Gaffney was on the panel with Dr. Taylor, former UN inspector, and also I said to Mr. Gaffney was saying, well, you know, what we need to do, we need to get the President more about the potential and this and that. And I said, well, the problem is trust. The American people have to trust the Congress. They have to trust the administration, be Democrat or Republican. And I said to Mr. Gaffney, I said, I assume that an article in the London Times and the New York Times must be accurate because I've heard no one dispute it. Because if it is true, I would want to demand that I get 8 o'clock national TV to say this is not right. I will not accept it. But this is what was said, just 2 quick points. This is by David Manning, who was Mr. Blair's chief foreign policy advisor at the time. Mr. Blair and Mr. Bush were meeting. This is about 6 months before we went into Iraq. And this is what Mr. Manning says. Our diplomatic strategy had to be arranged around the military planning. He further stated that at one point during this discussion between Mr. Blair and Mr. Bush that it was said that Mr. Bush suggested that the U.S. might be able to have a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft colored in the UN colors, followed by American fighters, and fly it over Iraq, and maybe Saddam Hussein would shoot it down. And if Saddam fired on them, it would be a breach. He further stated that maybe it would be possible to